Welcome to the Library of Congress presentation, West Side Story, the creation of a classic. My name is Janet McKinney, and I'm an archivist in the music division. I have had the privilege of working with the Bernstein Collection and the utmost privilege of working with my colleagues, Mark Horowitz and Kate Miller, on all things musical theater. Mark will first be sharing some really fascinating insights and original materials with you regarding the genesis of West Side Story. And then Kate will show you how you can find some of these collection materials online so you can view them anytime you like. My role is to go over the somewhat boring but very necessary logistics for today's presentation. To start off, let's talk about the view options in Zoom. You all have the ability to customize your own view, but we highly recommend you keep it on speaker view. If you are not currently in speaker view, there is a button in the upper right-hand corner to switch over. You also enter the room with your microphone muted for now. We encourage you to leave your comments and questions in the chat at any time. If it's a simple, direct question, we may be able to answer you right away within the chat feature, but we do have time for questions after the presentation is over, in which case we may verbally address your question at that time. In the chat, there is a drop-down menu of the participants where sending your chat to everyone is most likely the default. If you are shy, you are welcome to choose my name, Janet McKinney, from the drop-down menu, and I will be the only one to receive your question. And we will get to as many as we can during the Q&A. If you're having any sort of technical difficulties, please send a direct chat to my colleague Solomon by choosing Solomon Hallis-Lacey from the drop-down list in the chat. You can also see him in the gallery view as solo, and he will do his very best to assist you. Finally, this presentation is being recorded. We will not be sending it out via email, but it will be going up on the library's website in a couple of weeks. So please do check the Performing Arts Reading Room website, as well as the Music Division's Facebook page to see when it is released. I think that's it. Thank you for your kind attention. And without further ado, welcome my colleague, Mark Horowitz.
Hello, I am Mark Horowitz. I'm a senior music specialist at the Library of Congress. And for the past 25 years, among other things, I've been the curator of our vast Leonard Bernstein collection. West Side Story is a staggeringly important show. It brought together an extraordinary group of talented people, particularly director-choreographer Jerome Robbins, who also conceived the show, librettist Arthur Lawrence writing his first musical, composer Leonard Bernstein, and Stephen Sondheim as a lyricist for his first Broadway show. The show's designer was Oliver Smith, and it was produced by Roger Stevens, Bobby Griffith, and Harold Prince. The show changed people's understanding of what a musical could be, what it could be about, how it could use dance to tell its story, how daring and difficult its music could be, and the expected talent of its cast members, even how its sets would function. The show has had 4 Broadway revivals, 1 film, and as we speak, a new film version is in the can, due to be released in a month. And I've heard good things about it. We think of the show as a classic. It's easy to forget how daring the show was, how ahead of its time. Our aim today is to give you some sense of how it came about, the history of the creation of the show, and to share some of the documentation about it that's available in the Music Division at the Library of Congress, and in many cases, items we've put online. Most of what we'll be discussing comes from the library's Leonard Bernstein collection, estimated at about 400,000 items. But we also have Arthur Lawrence collection, the Roger Stevens collection, the Hal Prince collection, and the Oliver Smith collection, all of which include materials related to West Side Story. The library has also been promised the Stephen Sondheim collection as a bequest. So we are the home of West Side, I think. What some of you may not know is the show's birth pangs began several years earlier than you might think, possibly as early as 1947. The original notion for the show came from Jerome Robbins. His idea was to do a contemporary version of Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Now, one of the overlooked, but one of the best resources for research in the Bernstein collection are the 130 scrapbooks. One volume spans 4 months from June 1st through October 3rd, 1957, and has 279 pages. It includes the out-of-town programs and articles written by both Arthur Lawrence and Hal Prince. And there's also a wonderful interview with Jerome Robbins that appeared in the August 1957 issue of Dance magazine. Asked what was the genesis of this striking idea, Robbins answers, "I was asked to read the part of Romeo by an actor friend. I was struck by the intensity of adolescent feeling in the play. I began to think of how to transpose this violence of emotion to the world today. I began to explore possibilities of making it come alive. I looked for analogous situations today." Legend has it that that actor friend was Montgomery Clift. Having worked with Bernstein before on the ballet Fancy Free and the musical On the Town, Robbins convinced Bernstein to join him in the venture. What many of you may not know is the original notion would have had the Romeo character and his gang be Italian Catholics, and Juliet and her family would be Jewish. Here we have Bernstein's annotated copy of Romeo and Juliet. On the inside cover, Bernstein has written an outline for the show. For Act 1, Scene 1, he's written street scene, pushcarts, enter Romeo, or Mulberry Street Festival, or Easter equals Passover. For Act 2, Scene 2, Lenny provocatively posits sex, plan to escape to Mexico. At the top of the very first page of the play itself, Bernstein writes as a reminder, as a mantra, quote, "an out-and-out plea for racial tolerance." Likely that came later. There are a few notes scattered inside, such as suggesting a song to be titled "It's the Jews." Lenny ultimately wrote a song with that title, and the concept is whatever bad things happen in the world, people blame the Jews. Here's an excerpt from his lyric for that. "When the rain forgets to rain, it's the Jews. When the sun dries up the plain, it's the Jews. When demand won't match supply, it's the Jews. But if prices go to high, it's those foreign Jews." Here we have an outline of scenes by Jerome Robbins with notes in the margin by Bernstein on the side. You'll note next to where Robbins has bridal, Bernstein writes marriage dummies, clearly referring to the mannequins that were ultimately used when Tony and Maria dressed them up as part of the scene where they marry each other. One wonders if this idea was Lenny's or a note he made during a discussion. There's another scene breakdown in Lenny's Hand Alone. One of the things I find interesting there is that for Act 1, Scene 4, the balcony scene, Bernstein has proposed 2 numbers, a Juliet solo that adds Romeo and Tanta and leads to another number he describes as Farewell. Tanta means aunt, which grew out of the character of the nurse in Romeo and Juliet and eventually transformed into Anita in West Side Story. We know that the solo proposed in that spot for Juliet will ultimately be given to Romeo, or rather Tony, as the song Maria, and the farewell duet will become Tonight. There's a 3-page document, suggestions for musical numbers. For Act 1, Scene 4, to take place at the candy or drugstore, 4 possible numbers are outlined, including Druggist, Romeo's song on marriage, or how you know when you're in love, Druggist always knew and was always wrong, or advice on never taking advice, or a 3-part number for Jews, Italians, and druggists in re-tolerance, etc. And then for the very end of the show, there's this proposed number, reprise of love music for their last tender whispered scene together, soaring naturally at the end to drown out the sound of the scenery going off and the audience blowing noses, we hope. In the final show, we will end with a few halting, unaccompanied measures of Somewhere, followed by 7 instrumental measures that end on a pianissimo. But there's definitely some blowing of noses. Here, we have yet another outline of several pages. Here, this is from page 3, and there are excerpts from 2 scenes descriptions. The first is for the fight at the end of Act 1. Just reading it, I find it thrilling. The playing of the 2 gangs gets slow, tense, cat-like. Romeo doesn't respond, cracks from Tybalt. Romeo won't be baited, but Mercutio, furious at this, rises to the bait for Romeo. Tybalt retorts. Romeo tries to prevent the fight and starts slowly, then becomes, to chants of Dirty Wop and Dirty Kike, a violent tango with razors, sticks, broken bottles. In terrible blind fury, Romeo picks up Mercutio's razor and kills Tybalt. Romeo is horrified by what he has done. A police whistle, he starts, another, a few voices, more whistles. He begins to run like a trapped animal. Curtain. Then Act 2 begins at the Capulets at their Passover Seder. Tybalt, as the youngest son, is, quote, not there to ask the 4 questions. Why is this night different from all other nights? This is brilliant writing. We, the audience, know what's happened and what the family will soon discover. In a later scene breakdown, after the decision to make the gangs Puerto Rican versus Anglo, Lawrence describes the scene thus, taking place in Juliet's family's crowded apartment, quote, at opening of scene, members of her family are singing and playing guitar, a gay, happy Puerto Rican type folk tune. Juliet is busy dressing for her date with Romeo. Very faintly, police siren whistles in the background. Schrank comes into the apartment to say that Bernardo has been murdered by Romeo. The family doesn't understand English, and Juliet has to translate the horrible news. Schrank, by the way, is the policeman. As most of you know, finally in West Side Story, this ultimately becomes the I Feel Pretty scene. But in all iterations, the second act opens with something celebratory while we, the audience, know the tragedy that's already happened and how devastating it will be. The collaborators had abandoned the show after deciding the Jewish Catholic notion was unworkable. I suspect they had a hard time envisioning Jewish gangs. But then Lenny went to Hollywood to conduct on August 12th, 1955. And while there, he and Lawrence saw an article in the paper that inspired them to rethink the show by having the 2 gangs be Hispanics versus Anglos. I can't swear that this is the article they saw, but I think it might be. From the Los Angeles Times, August 22nd, 1955. 6 youths were jailed for investigation of murder here today in the street fight death of Robert C. Garcia, 20, at a Saturday night teenage dance. Police said Garcia, leader of a local gang known as the Junior Raiders, died at San Bernardino County Hospital following a fistfight with Rudolph M. Senna, 19, outside the Johnson Community Hall. There you have it, gangs, murder, and it even followed a dance. There's one outline I want to share simply as a warning. Various show titles were considered over time, one of them definitely being Gangway. But as you'll see, this early one has a quote, working title, Gang Bang. I happened to show it once to Arthur Lawrence and asked him about it, and his immediate response was, it was a joke. We never considered it seriously as a title. So beware that sometimes just because something is part of an archival collection doesn't mean it's what it appears to be. There's a remarkable letter from Jerome Robbins to Bernstein and Arthur Lawrence dated October 18th, 1955. We have Bernstein's copy in which he's made some notes in the margins. In the first page, Robbins argues against their current outline, which has the show in 3 acts, and he worries about how the character of Anita is being portrayed. Quote, a typical downbeat blues, torch-bearing second character, Julie of Showboat. And ultimately, they did make the character younger and stronger. The letter ends with 2 fascinating paragraphs. The first, as for the all-over picture, we're dead unless the audience feels that all the tragedy can and could be averted, that there's hope and a wish for escape from the tragedy and attention built on that desire. We must always hold out the tantalizing chance of a positive ending. Romeo and Juliet particularly must feel this and be sure of it. It's another reason why I dislike Kvetchy Anita so much. Let's not have anyone in the show feel sorry for themselves. And you'll see in the margin, Bernstein's written all too true. The penultimate paragraph in the letter is about the dancing. It will never be well incorporated into the show unless some of the principals are dancers. I can see easily why Romeo and Juliet must be singers, but Mercutio has to be a dancer, maybe Anita, and for sure some of the prominent gang members. Otherwise, if any of the dance sequences do take over the stage, your principals will move to the side and a terrible separation happens. Practically, it's easier to rehearse with separate units, but with all the experience I've had, it's by far more beneficial to the unity of the show to have the principals do everything. It's a sorry sight and a backbreaking effort, and usually an unsuccessful one, to build the numbers around some half-assed movements of a principal who can't move. Think it over. And Bernstein writes an underlined right. And as it happens, they did have a much longer rehearsal period than was then typical, I think 2 weeks longer. What some of you may not know is how extraordinary the casting of West Side Story was. Almost everyone in the cast was a triple threat: singer, dancer, and actor. Heretofore, it was not unusual to have separate dancing chorus and singing chorus, and rarely were the characters particularly differentiated. And as long as we're speaking of the casting of the show, there are several pages of Bernstein's notes from the auditions. Here's one page, for example. It includes several things of interest. There's a check next to Chita Rivera as Anita, and one next to Lee Becker as Anybody's, next to which Bernstein writes "Tarif." Larry Kert was auditioning for Bernardo, and Bernstein writes, "Great singer and performer, but looks Red Riff better." As for Carol Lawrence's Maria, lovely soprano, not quite Maria, much realer with accent. By the way, just below Larry Kert appears Anita Ellis, who, as it happens, was Kurt's real-life sister. Rumor has it that the character of Anita had been named after her, but perhaps that was for the earlier version of the show. Here, Bernstein has written Jewish quality. Ellis and Kert had indeed grown up in an Orthodox Jewish household. Not seen on this page is Warren Beatty's audition for Riff, where Bernstein wrote, "Can't open jaw, charming as hell, clean cut." There have been comments over the years that people given the most credit for West Side Story were 4 Jewish men: Robbins, Bernstein, Lawrence, and Sondheim. But there were others involved who tend to be looked over. You'll note this article with 2 women in small print, and they're starring in men's roles below and much larger. That's the show's stage manager was Ruth Mitchell, who would go on to have one of the most significant careers on Broadway, mostly working with Hal Prince, and the show's lighting designer, Jean Rosenthal, an inventive force in her own right, both in the Broadway world and the dance world. Ruth Mitchell was a stage manager for Rodgers and Hammerstein in the 1940s and ended her career in the 90s, having become a director and producer. As some of you may know, initially there were to be 2 producers of the show, Roger Stevens and Cheryl Crawford. Crawford had been one of the founders of the Group Theater, followed by the American Repertory Theater, followed by the Actors Studio. But things between Crawford and the collaborators began devolving. There are carbons of 2 very revealing letters in the library's Roger Stevens collection. Interestingly, one is addressed from Crawford to Arthur Lawrence and the other from Lawrence to Crawford, but they both indicate that their letters are supposed to be for, quote, their eyes alone. Crawford's letter, dated April 11th, 1957, has various complaints and suggestions. She wants to show how the neighborhood's deteriorated over time as some people make enough money to move out. The weak are unfortunate left behind, and new waves move in. And she suggests more backstory, such as for Chino. Suppose he's very homely, so in order to get a rep, to make a dent in the gang, he's found a shady way of making dough. He's engaged to Maria because he gave Bernardo the money to bring Maria and her mother up from Puerto Rico. Lawrence, in his response, "I feel that in general, your suggestions tend toward a social opera about today's youth, with the minor story of 2 lovers. This is not the show we intended to do, and it is not the show that I, at any rate, want to do." He later adds, "It is character we are and should be after. Names, addresses, financial statements, parental situations are cliches and don't help an audience. They never characterized anybody, and I am bored to death with them. I cheerfully leave them to Paddy Chayefsky and that whole dreary, old-fashioned garbage school. No one wants to go to the theater to see a kitchen sink. A murder, yes. You say Tony's killing is not inevitable, neither is Romeo's or Juliet's, and I don't think it matters. What does matter to me is that the audience is convinced of his desire to be killed. That is character, and that is more important than all the sociological, crotch-scratching facts in the naturalistic world. I apologize for my vehemence on the subject of the naturalism, but it is something I am sick to death of in the theater and is one reason why I wanted to do a musical. I love that letter. Not long after that, Gerald Crawford left the production to be replaced by producers Hal Prince and Robert Griffith. There is one social aspect that was considered in the show, but ultimately not used: the threat of nuclear war. It was no accident that one of the gangs was named the Jets. Originally, the opening number, which is now All Dance, was a long, complicated sung number. It included this: up to the moon, gonna bomb it, up like a comet, burning the stars, up to the moon, got a mission, nuclear fission, blow it to Mars. And one of the sections of the dance at the gym was titled Atom Bomb Mambo, and Lenny sketched out lyrics for it. Atom bomb, you'll protect my dear country. Atom bomb, keep my daughter and son free. When things look bad, you'll look after my dad and mom. Atom bomb. Hear the plea of my mambo. You're the best, sweet American bomb. Atom bomb mambo. Mushroom, va-va-voom, fallout, warhead, what you said, neutron, man, you're gone. In the aforementioned interview with Robbins, he discusses his research on the show and meeting with real gang members, stating, quote, I think they have a sense of having been born into one of the worst worlds possible. Fallout, hydrogen bombs. You get the feeling that they think they have to live their lives now without delay. While nothing is ever explicitly stated in the final show, I think those ideas had an impact on how the show was written and the characters were conceived. I certainly feel it in Cool. The original plan was for Comden and Green to write the lyrics, possibly in conjunction with Bernstein. When they proved unavailable, Bernstein planned to write the lyrics himself and actually did a fair amount of writing. Because of the extraordinary demands of the show, particularly all the dance music, and I suspect some insecurity on Bernstein's part, the decision was made to bring in another lyricist as collaborator. The 25-year-old Stephen Sondheim got the job. This would be his first Broadway show. The first appearance of Sondheim's name in one of Bernstein's date books is October 18th, 1955. Arthur and Steve Sondheim here. In some cases, Sondheim did polishing of Bernstein's lyrics. In other cases, the lyrics seem all or mostly all Sondheim. My sense of the latter category include America, Officer Krupke, and Something's Coming. In the former category, I'd place Maria and One. By the way, One was originally to be the love song during the balcony scene, but it was determined to be not passionate enough, and it was moved to the wedding scene, and Tonight was extracted and expanded from the quintet for the balcony scene. Bernstein was a brilliant composer, conductor, and teacher, but I fear his lyric writing tended not to reach those same heights. I believe Somewhere was a collaborative effort, but there is a very different early draft of a lyric that I think was entirely Bernstein's. I suspect had this lyric been maintained, the song would never have achieved the popularity it has. Where has darkness gone? Where is this shining dawn? What bright earth are we living on? Can it be heaven? Heaven, what is this music filling the air? Don't you hear singing? Some magic bird is singing up there. He is the sunbird calling his lover, singing his one word, lover, lover, lover. Here, forevermore, we'll find what life is for. There's no after and no before, only now, here and now. Heaven, heaven, heaven. Anyway, as long as we're looking at Bernstein's hand, it's rather remarkable to remember that he was writing some of the music for West Side Story at the same time he was writing music for Candide. And while those two scores could hardly be more different, it turns out that some things he originally conceived for one wound up in the other. One example is the song One Hand, One Heart. Bernstein originally conceived it as a love duet for Candide and Cunegonde. It's a slow waltz, and for those of you who read music, it's midway on the second page where can appears. In Bernstein's original notion, most of the measures would be single held notes, and there was even a lyric that went with it. It went, One hand, one heart, your hand, my heart. It was Sondheim who asked Bernstein to change some whole notes into 3/4 notes, so it became make of our hands, one hand, make of our hearts, one heart. I'd argue that the single most important lyric line from the show is from Maria. The line, say it soft and it's almost like praying. The song comes shortly after Maria's brother, Bernardo, pulls Maria and Tony apart, telling her, I told you, there's only one thing they want from a Puerto Rican girl. Say it loud and there's music playing. Say it soft and it's almost like praying. Tells the audience everything they need to know about the character of Tony's love, that it is deep and profound. And by the way, the song Maria is another good example of the collaboration on the lyrics. Before Sondheim's involvement, it seems Bernstein had begun. He had Maria, I'll say it and say it, Maria. It lifts me like a song. The sound of it is strong and warm. Maria, it's the sound of an organ playing. It's a sound like in church when they're praying. So the religious notion in these is Bernstein, but I think where Sondheim's refinements make it stronger and clearer. There's one other person who should be mentioned in any discussion of the creation of West Side Story, the set designer, Oliver Smith. Smith designed for dance and film and the original productions of over 40 Broadway shows, including My Fair Lady, The Sound of Music, Hello, Dolly, and The Odd Couple. Something of a chameleon as a designer, Smith's designs for West Side Story were unusually stark, with some exceptions. But what's not clear in these renderings is the architecture and engineering behind what he did. However, the most startling and extraordinary scene change happened in the transition from the dress shop to the dance at the gym. And according to Sondheim, what happened began as fairly ordinary, but it was out of town in Washington that Jerome Robbins came up with the change that made it extraordinary. Simply by adding streamers, Maria ends the scene saying, tonight is the real beginning of my life as a young lady of America. She begins to whirl in the dress as the shop flies off and suddenly a flood of gaily colored streamers pours down. And timed with Bernstein's blaring brass intro of the dance at the gym, it's electric and thrilling moment. During the last few weeks of West Side Story's creation, through its out-of-town tryout in Washington, D.C., there are a wonderful set of letters from Bernstein to his wife, Felicia, who at the time was in South America visiting her family. These letters trace a fascinating progression. The first letter, undated, quote, the show, yes, I am depressed with it. All the aspects of the score I like best, the big poetic parts, get criticized as operatic, and there's a concerted move to chuck them. What's the use? And underlined, this is the last show I do. July 28th. Home tomorrow in time for a run through of Act 1. In a minute, it will be August and off to Washington, and people will be looking at West Side Story in public and hearing my poor little mashed up score. All the things I love most in it are slowly being dropped. Too operatic, this and that. They're also scared of commercial success, and commercial success means so much to them. To me too, I suppose, but I still insist it can be achieved with pride. I shall keep fighting. August 3rd. We ran through today for the first time. The problems are many and varied, overwhelming, but we've got a show there, and just possibly a great one. I never sleep, everything gets rewritten every day. That's my life for the moment. And imagine we open 2 weeks from Monday, August 8th. I missed you terribly yesterday. We wrote a new song for Tony that's a killer, and it just wasn't the same playing it first for you, not playing it first for you. It's really going to save his character, a driving 2/4 in the great tradition, but of course, up by me with 3/4 and whatnot. But it gives Tony balls so that he doesn't emerge as just a euphoric dreamer. That song was Something's Coming, and it was the last song written for the show. August 11th, we had our first run through for People yesterday, and it was a smash. But I'm worried. There is so much that doesn't work for me, but there is a great show there. August 15th, up all night trying to put together an overture of sorts to carry through until I do a real good prelude. Orchestra reading all day yesterday, a thrill. We have surprisingly good men who can really play this terribly difficult stuff, except 1 or 2 of them. and the orchestrations have turned out brilliant. I tell you, this show may yet be worth all the agony. As you can see, I'm excited as hell. Oh, so different from Candide. West Side Story began out-of-town tryouts in Washington, D.C. on Monday, August 19th, and here's Lenny in the theater that night. His final letter is from August 28th. It's all too exciting. I never dreamed it could be like this. Reviews such as one would write for oneself. Later he goes on. Of course, as they say, it's only Washington, not New York. Don't count chickens. But it sure looks like a smash. And all our experiments seem to have worked. The book works, the tragedy works, the ballets shine, the music pulses and soars. There's at least one history-making set, it's all too good to be true. And by the way, that according to Sondheim, that history-making set was Under the Highway, the end of Act One, and Sondheim described it with one word: spectacular. West Side Story opened on Broadway on September 26, 1957. And that evening, Stephen Sondheim handed a letter to Bernstein that reads, "Dear Lenny, you know only too well how hard it is for me to show gratitude and affection, much less to commit them to writing. But tonight I feel I must. West Side Story means much more to me than a first show, more even than the privilege of collaborating with you and Arthur and Jerry. It marks the beginning of what I hope will be a long and enduring friendship. Friendship is a thing I give and receive rarely, but for what it's worth, I want you to know you have it from me always. I don't think I've ever told you how fine I think the score is, since I prefer kidding you about the few moments I don't like to praising you for the many I do. West Side Story is a big step forward for you as it is for Jerry or Arthur or even me. And in an odd way, I feel proud of you. Much as I want to write music, I'm not sure I like the idea of doing another show without you. I will, of course, and I'll play it for you and you'll criticize it, and I'll be hostile and sarcastic about your criticism. But I look forward to that criticism and I hope you'll give it freely. My gratitude and affection, and also my best wishes and good luck for our little divertisement. May West Side Story mean as much to the theater and to people who see it as it has to us, Steve." It did, and it does. I want to close with another quote from that Robbins interview. He was asked, quote, "What does West Side Story say?" Mr. Robbins looked solemn, and he said, "The story has a hopeful as well as a tragic side. The tragic denouement at the time of her talk was in a state of flux. Mr. Robbins was not quite sure how many of the 5 leading characters would die at the end. But he was quite firm about its upbeat motive. Quote, it says that the price of prejudice is too high to pay. And that has remained true through every iteration of West Side Story. Thank you. And now my colleague Kate Miller will guide you in how to see and discover some of these original materials yourselves.
Thank you so much, Mark. Okay, I am going to share my screen. Okay, and we'll start with my PowerPoint. Great. Okay, yes, so yes, my name is Kate Miller, and I'm a reference librarian in the music division. I should start just by saying I love musical theater. So I jump at the chance to work with Mark on any musical theater project here, including this webinar today. So thank you everyone for joining us. I know that many of you are, I'm assuming you're very eager to get your questions to us and ask Mark about all of the wonderful stories and materials he showed us, and we're almost there. But before we do, I really wanted to take a quick opportunity to connect all of you with some of the online resources that, that provide you direct access to our West Side Story related material. And I'm happy to see some comments in the chat during Mark's presentation asking exactly how to do that. So this is where you learn. We will be throwing some of those links in the chat while I talk, so you can follow along, or you can bookmark them for later on after the webinar. And so let's get started. I'm going to move here. The Library of Congress, we really offer many online resources related to Leonard Bernstein in particular. And I could highlight all of those, but that would take me a while. The good news is we have a relatively new research guide that you see on the screen, and let's go look at it together live on the internet and take a look. The wonderful thing about this new research guide is it really pulls together all of those different resources we have into one place where you can find them all. So I wanted to share that guide with you here today. Generally speaking, the guide addresses different types of material in the music division and some other divisions as well, related to Bernstein. And it begins with a description of the Leonard Bernstein collection that Mark started out his talk describing. And if we scroll down here, you'll find a link to the finding aid to the Bernstein collection. That is our document that is going to describe the entire collection to you. And you can see how it's organized, what types of materials you're going to find, and even keyword search within the finding aid. I'm going to focus on the link above that, though, to the Leonard Bernstein digital collection. And I'm going to click on that. This is really the resource that will allow you direct access to digitized material from the Bernstein collection, and including West Side Story materials without even leaving your home. So let's take a quick look at that. Here we're on the About This Collection page for the digital collection. And one of the particularly wonderful things about this specific collection, and we have Mark to thank for this, is that if you scroll down below the description of the collection on this page, you'll find a list of canned searches. And the canned searches will take you to material that has been pulled together about specific people, specific works, or topics in the collection. So I wanted to make sure I pointed that out because it would be easy to miss it if you did not scroll down all the way. And if we scroll all the way down to the W's on the list, of course, there is a link to West Side Story material here. So I'm going to click on that link, and you see that we come to our list of collection items related to West Side Story. And my personal librarian tip that I'll give, I like to look at my list in the gallery mode. You'll see more items on a single page. The other thing I really like to do is I zoom down to the very bottom of the page. And if I move all of you, then I can maximize my results per page, just to reduce the clicking that I need to do as I search around. So those are just a couple of tips for looking at the material. But you'll see that we start out with music sketches. That's the first batch of material you see in this West Side Story canned search. So these are not going to be links to final drafts of the score or fair copies, but sketch material, yes, you'll find. So you can look for your favorite piece. Maybe it's, we'll click on Maria. I just want to show you what it looks like when you click on a specific item. Here you can click on the middle image here to see every single page in the item. You can select the page you want to focus on, and then you can zoom in to get a really good look at those, the notation, the markings. If there's anything that's erased, the zoom is a really wonderful tool to investigate erased markings too. And you see the melody there for the song we all know and love. Also, for every single image in the digital collection, you can download a JPEG or a TIFF file, which is really wonderful. You can take that into the classroom or for your own study, okay? I'm going to go back to the results that I was in before, and I just wanted to show you that if we keep going down the page here, you'll find that the canned search also includes correspondence, including that correspondence between Bernstein and his wife, Felicia, that Mark was reading from. It's fabulous, and you can read it all yourself online. There are a few photographs, more correspondence. The casting notes and audition notes are here, as well as this link that my cursor is circling right here to a bunch of drafts and outlines from early on in the process, which is just wonderful. Mark used a lot of images from that folder. Yes, somebody drew on it. Thank you. And this is where you can come to access all the material and get a closer look. Now, Mark also mentioned the scrapbooks, and someone specifically asked about where you find the scrapbooks online. So I will show you really quickly, since we're already in the Leonard Bernstein digital collection right now. A really quick, easy thing you can do is come to the top of the page, and there's a search bar here. And in the drop-down menu, it's actually this collection is written. So you can search just in the Leonard Bernstein digital collection, which makes your life a lot simpler. If we type scrapbook in and search, then we will get the results for the 130 scrapbooks that are in the collection. And you can go through and find the scrapbook that's of interest to you. Mark mentioned specifically the June 1st to October 2nd, 1957 scrapbook. So you can do a Control F find search to find the 1957 scrapbooks if you want, and start digging into those articles and reviews and programs. Okay. So that is a very, very short word about the digital collection. If you come back to the research guide that we were looking at the beginning, I encourage you to explore it for yourself more. You will find West Side Story related material also in the digital collections page. There's an online exhibit from an exhibit we put together for the 50th anniversary of the musical. Published scores and librettos, you can link to catalog record for the libretto for West Side Story. Published literature, you can discover books and dissertations about the musical. And event videos is a really great page as well. You can link to lectures about Bernstein. There is one lecture about West Side Story, and interviews as well, especially recent events from our centennial celebration a couple of years ago went online. So it's a fun resource to look at. Now, while it's broader in scope, I will also just mention, I think this audience would like to know about one other research guide. If we come to our performing arts collections research guides here, I'm just going to show that we have a broader guide to musicals of stage and screen, a guide to resources at the Library of Congress. So that's something I won't spend too much time talking about now, but I want you to know about, and know that you can come here to dive deeper into more of our musical theater collections as well. And finally, I'll just click on this Ask a Librarian link here. I'm just going to end my remarks by emphasizing that you can contact us via email using the Ask a Librarian online forum that you see in front of you. If you have a question about our collections, let us know. Our reference librarians are really eager and happy to answer those questions for you. And if you reach a point in your own research where you need to plan a visit to the Performing Arts Reading Room to view materials from the Bernstein collection or the Arthur Lawrence papers, or any other collection that we have, you can also email us to set that up. The Performing Arts Reading Room is open Monday through Saturday by appointment right now. So contact us and we can set that all up for you. Okay, I think I'm going to stop there. I am happy to answer more questions about where to find material, either here in the webinar or you can contact me after the webinar as well via Ask a Librarian if you want. And let's get to questions. I think that's what people are probably most excited for. Janet, do we have any questions in the queue yet?
So many questions. Thank you, Mark and Kate. That was very informative. Despite working here for many years, I definitely learned some new things in listening to your presentation. So thank you so much. Kate, if you will stop sharing your screen, I can highlight both you and Mark, and we can get to those questions. First question, quickly, I think, Kate, you could handle it. Someone was wondering if you needed a library card to access the materials. I don't know if they meant in person or online, but you could probably speak to that.
Sure. You do not need a reader card to access our online collections. Anything that I was showing you, from our research guides to our digital collections to the finding aids, you can access from home. You don't need to register for anything. If you do find that you need to come to the library to consult material in the performing arts reading room or another reading room, then yes, you do need to get a reader registration card. And we give you the links to help you make that happen when you connect with us to schedule an appointment to come in.
It appears when the play was about Jews and Catholics, more of the parents and the families were going to be on the stage. After they changed it to race and not religion, was there a version that had parents on stage, or do you know anything about that?
My memory from what I've seen is the largest scene with the family was the version where they were at their Passover Seder, where Maria's family. And there you had the parents and the family sitting around the table. But I haven't seen a script that has a full scene with dialogue with other family members involved.
Thank you. We did also have a couple questions about the film version of West Side Story. How involved were the big contributors with the film? I assume the creatives. How involved were they with the film? And do the Library of Congress archives, thank you, have any materials from Bernstein's involvement in the movie?
It's funny, I have not seen that much related to the movie. My sense is that most of the people involved were not that involved with the film. Robbins was originally choreographing the film, but he was going over budget and over time, and he was basically fired at a certain point. Sondheim wrote some changed lyrics for the film that to sort of pass the censors. I don't know of any involvement with Lawrence in the film. I've also heard from various sources or read that the creators were not as thrilled with the film as most of the rest of us seem to have been. I had a conversation once with Sondheim, and he mentioned something about things that were affecting on stage, such as, a 150-pound person leapfrogging over somebody else in a sort of a mock fight is dramatic and thrilling, and on the screen it tends to look a little silly, or it can. He criticized the fact that the laundry hanging from the clotheslines was color coordinated, that they made the film too pretty. I think they were thrilled by the success of the show. Jamie Bernstein is saying something, and I just lost what she's chatted, but she would know better than I. And I have heard from people who have seen the new film by Spielberg that it really is wonderful. So I'm incredibly excited about that. What I will say is there's a huge amount of business papers in the Bernstein collection, and I didn't touch on those at all. And there are boxes and boxes that deal with every aspect of West Side Story, from recordings to productions and legal matters. So there's a lot there to be discovered, but I didn't dig into it for today.
All right. We have a question regarding Nigel Simeone's book. Someone was wondering if the letters concerning West Side Story are comprehensive with respect to the show, or are there many more letters in the library's collections that didn't make it into the book?
Fascinating question. I would say certainly they're not complete, but I don't think it was because of censoring. And there are so many instances where there may be a side comment in a letter. There are, letters to his brother Burton or from his brother where, West Side Story will be mentioned in a sentence or a paragraph, that kind of thing. So it's not comprehensive, but I think Nigel did a wonderful job at trying to get to the meatiest things, and given space limitations and things like that. So it's more than a wonderful introduction, but there are certainly more that can be discovered. And I hope people will come.
There was a question about the color schemes. At what point in the process did the color scheme / color-coded gangs emerge? Whose idea was the color scheme? Jets in blue and yellow, sharks in pink, red, and purple. I don't know if that actually refers to the musical or the stage or the film.
The short answer is, this is embarrassing. I have absolutely no idea. I assume it was the set designer. I do know that in one iteration of the show, I believe the Jewish gang, there was something about the emeralds, which would have suggested green. But I have not seen any documentation on the color schemes, and I'm horribly embarrassed, and forgive me.
You do not need to be embarrassed, Mark. You are a wealth of information. This also might be, Jerome Robbins is one of the very few creative people involved in the West Side Story whose collection we do not have here at the library. Someone was wondering, how did Jerome Robbins come up with the unique style and body of movements of the Puerto Rican gang? Are you able to speak to that, or should they contact someone at New York Public Library?
Contact someone else. I will say, it just reminds me, again, in a conversation with Sondheim, he talked about the opening of West Side Story and how effective it was. And he described something as what he said Jerome Robbins called the sailing step, where their arms are sort of spread almost like sails on a ship, and that represented that they owned the streets. And I just got the sense from that a lot of the images that were used in the choreography had very specific meanings, at least to Robbins, that we may not always be aware of. But I get the sense that there's a fair amount of intellectualism behind many of the steps and movements.
Thank you. Someone was wondering, when was the decision for Maria to live at the end? When was that decision made? And perhaps how was it made? Do you know anything about that decision?
From what I've heard, it happened very late. It may have even happened in Washington. Clearly, that article in Dance Magazine, they still hadn't made the definite decision. My sense is that they felt it was unnecessary, and there's a famous, at least in one of the books, talks about that the creators believed that even though Maria lives physically, she's emotionally dead. And that was enough, that was sufficient for the audience, and for the tragedy was complete without having to have her physically die on stage. And I think that was a right choice.
All right. You spoke earlier about West Side Story being the creation of 4 Jewish guys. Someone was wondering if you thought that there at least 2 of them were gay, 1 bisexual. Do you think that had any effect on the creation of the show over their Jewish identity?
What I think, and it's always a tricky thing, but I think it always helps to be a writer and a creator when one has a sense of being an outsider. You view the world differently, I think, and I think you're able to be more sympathetic to a wider variety of characters and situations. So in an odd way, and I'd say that could be true for being Jewish as well, although again, it was so prevalent in the theater in the time. But I think it does, I think if you're Black or any minority, people who are creative, I think it tends to help their creativity because of their perspective. That's an entirely personal opinion, but there you have it.
Thank you.
Someone was wondering about extra lyrics in the Jet song that are never sung in the movie or the stage show, but appears in the cast recording of the 1957 version. Do you know anything about those extra lyrics?
There's a huge amount of lyrics for the opening that were cut entirely. The whole opening sequence was sung and went on for pages and pages and pages. And my understanding was it just became too complicated and too difficult. And the collaborators agreed that it would work better just as a dance number, that the lyrics were distracting and unnecessary. But it's something like a 15-page song. And I read a brief excerpt from it, but they talk about taking a trip to the moon, and there's back and forth between the different jets. It's not great. Again, I believe the right decision was made.
All right, let's see. I'm not sure if I understand this question entirely. So if Miles could give further information if it's not clear for Mark. Miles was wondering, how does the Spanish version play in the Spanish speaking countries, i.e. even the Anglos are conversing and singing in the language of the new arrivals?
I'm not sure I understand or know either. For the version, the last Broadway version, not the one that, the one that was done, I don't forget, 5 years ago, something like that. Lin-Manuel Miranda was translating some of the lyrics that were being sung by the Sharks, by the Puerto Ricans, into Spanish. And apparently over time, they became less and less and less. It does remind me that one of the famous stories about the show was that during a rehearsal or out of town, something like that, a friend of Sondheim's watched the show and made a comment to him about I Feel Pretty, and that, you know, it's made the character of Maria sound like somebody who could be in an old Coward play. I feel stunning and entrancing, feel like running and dancing for joy. And that's just not the character of Maria. And he wanted to change it, and the collaborators wouldn't let him. In my mind, I always sort of assumed or did the translation in my head that I Feel Pretty was actually being sung in Spanish in Maria's head, and the audience, were hearing the English translation, so it never bothered me. But I can certainly see the perspective But as for how it's received in Latin American countries, I don't know.
There was a question about an aria at the end of West Side Story for Maria. I understand that there was supposed to be an aria at the end, but there wasn't time to write it. So Lawrence's outline of what it should cover was used as Maria's final speech. Is there material that backs up this story?
My understanding was there is no additional material that I found that this was going to be a musical number. I think they talked about it. I think they assumed they would probably do it, but they could never come up with something that made sense, that didn't just feel inappropriate. And I think reasonably early on decided not to try and have an aria at the end. I will say that if you remember in the letters from Bernstein to Felicia, he talks about all the big operatic moments I like best, they want to cut. The number, A Boy Like That and I Have a Love, was much longer in an earlier version of Lenny's, and was much more operatic. And Tony does join in that number, and he has high C's. And we actually, for the 50th anniversary of West Side Story, we did a concert here where we included that. And as much as I adore Lenny, I think the collaborators were right. It was overwrought and over the top, and it didn't work. I think it's a much stronger show, not as operatic. Leave that to Candide.
I believe Stacy was wondering about Carol Lawrence's critical reception. Do you know much about how she was received by the public and or by critics at the time?
I've just always assumed wonderfully. I know it's funny. Several years ago, Carol Lawrence came to visit the library, and we spent some time looking through the collection. But one of the things, the library's Prints and Photographs division has the archives for Look magazine. And it turned out that they had planned a whole spread just on her during the time that she was in West Side Story. And there were something like 85 photographs taken, including production shots of her in the show. And for whatever reason, I don't know, there was a Cuban Missile Crisis or something like that. The article never happened. But Carol Lawrence came and was actually able to get prints then of some of these photos that she'd never seen before. But I think the fact that they were planning this huge spread just on her in relation to the show suggests that everything was, I can't imagine why they wouldn't be euphoric. She was beautiful with a magnificent voice and a great dancer, and everything one could ask for.
Thank you. Let's see, where was I? Someone is wondering if Kate could tell us, are there any other collection items on or about women designers or women in the American theater? Perhaps you've highlighted some in the musicals LibGuide.
Yes, if you go to the musicals LibGuide and you look at the theater section, we do link to, I can think of off the top of my head, the Peggy Clark papers, who was a designer, a lighting designer, who worked on the Town, actually. And that's who jumps out in my mind. You can link to the finding aid and read all about that collection there. Yes, so go to the musicals research guide that we linked to and find more there.
I want to add to that. The Peggy Clark collection is magnificent and underutilized. So if there are researchers out there looking for a doctoral thesis or dissertation subject or something, please take advantage of Peggy Clark, because she's just waiting for somebody to enjoy her treasures.
I agree. She's my hero. Maybe also Sylvia Fine. I'm about to work on the papers of Dana Suisse, and I'm very excited about that. Mark, there was a big conversation earlier, maybe not a big conversation, but a kind of stilted conversation about the use of the phrase "crap you" in the musical. Whose idea was that phrase? Did they ever consider using the F word instead? Could you just tell us more about?
I know that
crap you?
Sondheim wanted to use the F word, and he wanted to be the first lyricist on Broadway to use the F word in a lyric. Who talked him out of it, or why, or how? It seems a pretty obvious choice or decision. Somebody told me that it would have prevented the song to get radio play, although I don't know that of all the songs in the show, that one was one that would have gotten much radio play at the time. But it was his hope, but I think it was sort of an unrealistic one. I guess what surprises me is, to the best of my knowledge, it's not been used in any subsequent productions, and I'm not sure if the creators or Sondheim has been asked and said no or not. I'll be curious to see what happens in the movie.
So I have been trying to keep up with all of the questions in the chat. If I have missed your question, if you just want to copy and paste it over again, and we can address it. Otherwise, I will remind you that this presentation today was recorded, and we are going to be placing it on the library's website. It'll take a couple of weeks. It goes into post-production, and they'll add closed captioning and all that. So you can look for it on the Performing Arts Reading Room webpage, as well as the Music Division's Facebook page.
Janet, I did get one question directly earlier.
Sure.
And this is tied to the language question from before, and I think it might be the same person. Someone asked, what are the more exotic non-English languages West Side Story has been performed in? I mean, I'm aware of many. I don't know how I would decide what the most exotic one is, but maybe Mark, do you have something off the top of your head?
I don't. I do know in the collection there are several scripts for different language versions, and some of them were quite surprising. I think Hungarian and stuff like that. But I really can't answer intelligently about what the foreign productions sound like. I believe the show's been very popular in Japan. But I don't know if it was actually performed there in Japanese or with surtitles, or and perhaps somebody in the side does know. We do have the, what's his name's collection?
The Lars
Schmidt collection, which has a small online presence. And he produced West Side Story several times in Scandinavia. And there's a lot of material about that in that collection. So if you're interested in foreign language productions and versions of West Side Story, the Lars Schmidt collection that we have is a great resource.
Someone is wondering, Mark, if you could speak more about the song One Hand, One Heart, and James Agey's book include lost lyrics for Candide. When he died working on Candide, his numbers went to West Side Story. When Sondheim was given the tune that became One Hand, One Heart, he asked to change the whole notes to triplets, as you spoke about. I believe this lyric is the lost Agey lyrics, the whole note ones. Do you know anything about that?
I'm not sure I understand the question. I do know that the early version was actually recorded by and released commercially by the singer whose other nom de plume was Darlene Edwards, and Joe Stafford. Joe Stafford recorded the early version. So I don't know if that helps or answers the question at all. But
I may have butchered it as well. Someone was wondering if for the Spielberg version of the film, did he refer to materials here in our collections?
Not directly. A lot of material has, I suspect material has been shared that comes from the collection, but no one involved with the film actually came to the library to do research here. It certainly has happened with other things and other productions. And there's been talk for quite a while of a biopic about Bernstein, and the screenwriter for that has come and spent time at the library going through the collection in preparation for that. But none of the creators for the film of West Side Story actually came here to do research. I will say that there's about to be Tick, Tick, Boom by Jonathan Larson on Netflix. And the creators of that did come here and spend a lot of time in the Jonathan Larson collection for that, including Lin-Manuel Miranda. And so we're very excited about that. So it happens.
Going back a moment, what was the name of the song that Joe Stafford sang?
It was just, it's what became One Hand, One Heart, and at that time was just titled One. And it was the one that, one hand, one heart, your hand, my heart.
All right, and as a final question, Mark, this is right up your alley. West Side Story is popular, of course, but how do you think it is ranked among Mr. Sondheim's lyrical works for other productions?
I know he's embarrassed about parts of it, but I feel much more positively about it than I think he does. He refers to Somewhere as the song. He's somewhat embarrassed that there's and that the big leap, the high note, lands on the least consequential word and that he couldn't come up with anything better than that. I think it's perfectly fine and makes sense. There was definitely tension between he and Lenny, and Lenny tended to like, I think what Sondheim refers to as purple lyrics, and some of those stayed in the show. In Tonight, the world was just an address, a place for us to live in, no better than all right. I think there are some lyrics that are don't live up to what we expect of the Sondheim standard now. And I said before about his embarrassment about I Feel Pretty being inappropriate for Maria. But I think the best of them are spectacular. And certainly the Something's Coming and G. Officer Krupke is brilliant. And I know America is somewhat controversial these days, but I think it's for reasons that, to my mind, are somewhat misunderstood and a little unfair. But compared to other lyrics at the time and by other lyricists, I think you can't go wrong with Sondheim.
Agreed. Well, thank you, Mark, for sharing your huge wealth of knowledge, your expertise. I know you've spent many, many years working with Bernstein and all of his collection materials, so thank you. And thank you, Kate, for sharing with us how to find those materials at home. I have placed the Ask a Librarian link in the chat. So if there's any questions that I apologize I missed, you can just place them there and we will definitely get back to you. And Mark, yes.
I wanted to add one thing, which is I think, at least at one point, I don't know if they're still there, all three of Bernstein's children have been attending this. And I just want to thank them personally for the Bernstein collection. It is truly one of the great treasures of the library. And it's among, I think it well may be the most heavily used collection in the music division. If not, it's in the top 3. And it's an endless source of research and information. And I bless them every day for it. So thank you.
We thank you, and the American people thank you. All right, everyone, have a wonderful evening. Thank you for coming.